Today we are going to look at Ashlesha Nakshatra. Ashlesha occupies the last degree of Cancer and is the ninth nakshatra in the Vedic zodiac. What makes Ashlesha interesting and worth studying carefully is that it carries one of the most complex sets of themes in the entire nakshatra system. It has a clear shadow side, but it also has genuine gifts. And when you look at historical figures with Ashlesha prominent in their charts, these themes become very easy to see. So let's start with the basics, the symbol and the deity, and build from there. Ashlesha's symbol is a coiled serpent. The presiding deity is Sarpas, which is simply the divinized form of the serpent itself. So the symbolism here is very direct. Everything about this nakshatra connects back to the snake. Now, in the Indian cultural context, snakes carry a very specific set of associations. On the negative side, deception, cold bloodedness, operating in secrecy, and of course, the venomous bite. Snakes are also seen as creatures that hypnotize their prey, that move unseen, that strike without warning. But snakes also carry positive associations: wisdom, concentrated power, primordial energy, particularly sexual energy. In yogic traditions, the Kundalini itself is depicted as a coiled serpent at the base of the spine. So Ashlesha holds both of these, the venom and the wisdom, in the same symbol. That duality is important to keep in mind as we go through the rest of the material. The key themes of Ashlesha follow directly from the serpent symbolism. They include coiling and intertwining, secrecy, deception, torment, and what the tradition describes as secret sexual unions. These are the shadow themes. On the positive side, Ashlesha governs deep insight and holistic understanding. Ashlesha natives often have the ability to perceive what others miss, to see beneath the surface of situations and people. There is an important tension here that is worth understanding. That same insight, the capacity to see clearly, very often provokes misunderstanding in others. People around the Ashlesha native may find them unsettling or hard to read. This can lead to painful separations and difficulties in relationships. So the gift and the challenge are closely related. When the ascendant falls in Ashlesha, the classical texts tell us the native tends towards bluntness. If the chart is otherwise afflicted, that bluntness can make the person contentious, someone who's difficult to be around, or who generates strong reactions in others. Muhammad Ali is a well known example. He was born with Ashlesha rising. If you think about Ali's public persona, the way he moved, the way he spoke, the way he could hold an entire room or arena in his attention, that hypnotic quality is very characteristic of Ashlesha. He also provoked very strong reactions. People either admired him intensely or found him deeply aggravating. That polarizing effect is also typical of this nakshatra. Now, the most striking cluster of Ashlesha ascendants in modern history belongs to the Nehru-Gandhi political dynasty in India. Three members of that family, Indira Gandhi, Her son Rajiv Gandhi and his wife Sonia Gandhi all had Ashlesha rising. Indira Gandhi ruled India with considerable force. She declared the emergency in 1975, suspended civil liberties, and concentrated power in ways that her critics described as deeply manipulative. The behind the scenes maneuvering, the networks of loyalty and control, these are classic Ashlesha characteristics. Rajiv Gandhi came to power suddenly after his mother's assassination. His rise was rapid, and his tenure was marked by controversy and forces operating beneath the surface, culminating in his own assassination in 1991. Sonia Gandhi then stepped into the same political space after Rajiv's death. She is perhaps the clearest example of Ashlesha's capacity to hold power quietly and out of sight. For much of her tenure leading the Congress party, she was arguably the most powerful person in India. Yet, she operated largely from behind the scenes. That is a very specific Ashlesha quality. The moon in Ashlesha works differently from the ascendant. The moon governs the mind and the emotional nature. So here, Ashlesha's qualities show up in how the person thinks and feels rather than necessarily in their outward personality. The first Prime Minister of India, Nehru, had his moon in Ashlesha. Nehru represents what we might call the higher expression of this nakshatra, the insight and wisdom rather than the deception. He was philosophically sharp, capable of holding complex and contradictory ideas together, and had a deep understanding of both people and historical forces. He was also at times misunderstood, which is consistent with Ashlesha. Queen Elizabeth II also had a moon in Ashlesha. Her reign lasted 70 years, and what it required, above almost everything else, was the ability to say very little publicly while remaining the symbolic center of an entire institution. She was watchful, strategic, and gave nothing away. That quality of holding power through stillness and concealment is very much in keeping with Ashlesha Moon. Finally, Mahatma Gandhi's moon was also in Ashlesha, and it happened to rule his 10th house of career. The classical teaching here is that Ashlesha disrupts the significations of whatever planet it holds. Gandhi's career was disrupted repeatedly: imprisonment, political sidelining, periods of irrelevance, followed by restoration. Yet, he turned each disruption into a form of influence. That is an important lesson about how Ashlesha's difficult qualities can be worked with rather than simply suffered. One of Ashlesha's specific themes is what the tradition calls secret sexual unions, the hypnotic and magnetic quality of desire. Marilyn Monroe had Ashlesha rising, and she is a useful example of how this theme manifests. Monroe's public image was built almost entirely around a certain kind of magnetic, irresistible attraction. But what is less often discussed is her perceptiveness. She was a great deal more intelligent and self aware than she was given credit for. She could see her situation clearly, the way she was being used, the gap between who she was and how she was being presented. That is the Ashlesha insight at work. Her life also carried Ashlesha's shadow themes: secret relationships with powerful men, painful separations, and a persistent sense of being misunderstood. The combination of magnetic power and personal suffering is something you see repeatedly in this nakshatra. Physically, Ashlesha governs the joints, the nails, and the ears. In terms of careers, the classical sources point to several categories. First, those who work with poisons or toxic substances in some form, like chemical engineers, pharmacists, and on the other end of the spectrum, those dealing with addiction. Second, people who work with reptiles, like zoologists and herpetologists. Third, those who operate behind the scenes in positions of influence, like political strategists and what the texts describe as cunning or miserly business people. On the more positive side, Ashlesha governs controversial but insightful thinkers, people whose perception puts them ahead of their time. It also governs those who work with primordial energy in a more conscious way, practitioners of Kundalini Yoga, depth psychologists, and others whose work involves going beneath the surface. So, to summarize what we have covered today, Ashlesha is the nakshatra of the coiled serpent. Its core themes are secrecy, deception, and the accumulation of power on the shadow side, and deep insight, wisdom, and holistic understanding on the positive side. The two are closely related, and in most Ashlesha natives, you will find both present to some degree. When the ascendant falls in Ashlesha, there is often a magnetic, polarizing quality, the ability to hold attention and accumulate influence, sometimes through methods that others may find difficult to see or name. When the moon is in Ashlesha, that same penetrating quality shows up in the inner life, a person who perceives deeply but is often misunderstood. If you have planets in Ashlesha, it is worth asking which side of the serpent is more active, the wisdom or the venom. The nakshatra gives you the capacity for both.